the first German patrol vanished on a Tuesday. 8 soldiers, walking single file through a mountain pass in the Pindus range of northern Greece. They were experienced men, veterans of the Balkan campaign, armed with rifles and grenades, and the absolute certainty that no Greek partisan could challenge them in open terrain. They entered the pass at dawn. They never came out. The search party found them 3 days later, scattered across a rocky slope like broken dolls. Some had been shot, others had fallen from cliffs. 2 had been torn apart by something with teeth. The commanding officer, a captain named Myler, had survived long enough to write a single word in his own blood on a flat stone. Hund. Dog. It was September 1943. And the German occupation of Greece was entering its 3rd year. The Wehrmacht controlled the cities and the major roads, but the mountains belonged to the partisans and to something else. Something the Germans were only beginning to understand. In the villages of the Pindus, they called him Stavros the shepherd. The Germans would learn to call him something else entirely. To understand what happened in those mountains during the autumn of 1943, you have to understand what the German occupation had done to Greece. The country was starving. The Wehrmacht had stripped the land of food, livestock, and fuel, shipping everything of value back to the Reach. In Athens alone, over 40,000 people had died of hunger in the winter of 1941–42. In the villages, the situation was even worse. The resistance had begun almost immediately, but it was disorganized, poorly armed, and brutally suppressed. For every German soldier killed by partisans, the Wehrmacht executed 50 Greek civilians. Entire villages were burned, their populations massacred as punishment for resistance activities that sometimes hadn't even occurred. The partisans needed a new approach. Direct attacks were suicidal. The Germans had overwhelming firepower and no hesitation about using it on civilians. Ambushes worked occasionally, but the reprisals made them too costly. What the resistance needed was a way to kill Germans without being seen, without leaving evidence, without giving the occupiers anyone to blame. They needed a ghost. What they got was a shepherd with a very unusual dog. Stavros Papadimitriou was born in 1895 in a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. His father was a shepherd, as his father had been before him, and his father before that. The Papadimitriou family had been tending sheep in the Pindus Mountains for as long as anyone could remember, moving with the seasons between summer pastures in the high meadows and winter grazing in the valleys below. Stavros learned to read the mountains before he learned to read words. He knew every pass, every cave, every hidden spring. He knew which slopes would avalanche in winter and which cliffs could be climbed in the dark. He knew the weather patterns, the animal trails, the places where a man could hide for days without being found. But his greatest gift was with dogs. The Greek shepherd dog, the Elynikos poimenikos, is not like other breeds. Developed over centuries to guard flocks against wolves, bears, and human thieves, they are fiercely intelligent, utterly loyal, and capable of making complex decisions without human guidance. A good shepherd dog doesn't wait for commands. It reads situations, anticipates threats, and acts on its own judgment. Stavros had been training these dogs since childhood, but his methods were different from other shepherds. While most men trained their dogs to follow orders, Stavros trained his to think. He would set up scenarios: a wolf attacking from one direction, a thief approaching from another, and let the dogs figure out how to respond. Over years of patient work, he developed dogs that could execute complex strategies with nothing more than a whistle and a hand signal. "My dogs don't follow orders," he used to say. "They understand intentions. I tell them what I want to happen, and they figure out how to make it happen." Other shepherds thought he was crazy. They mocked his trick dogs. and his strange training methods. A proper shepherd dog, they said, should obey commands, not make decisions on its own. What Stavros was doing was unnatural, perhaps even dangerous. They stopped laughing in 1943. When the Germans came, Stavros was 48 years old, with a wife, 3 grown sons, and a pack of 7 dogs that he had spent decades training. The occupation cost him everything except the dogs. His sons joined the partisans. 2 were killed in a failed ambush, the 3rd was captured and executed. His wife died of typhus in the winter of 1942. His sheep were confiscated by the Wehrmacht. By the summer of 1943, Stavros Papadimitriou had nothing left to lose. And he had 7 dogs that could do things no German would ever expect. The partisan commander in the Pindus region was a former army officer named Aris Velociotis, a hard man who had little patience for old shepherds with strange ideas. When Stavros approached him with a proposal to use his dogs against German patrols, Aris laughed in his face. "Dogs," he said. "You want to fight the Wehrmacht with dogs? Go home, old man. This is a war." "Give me 1 patrol," Stavros said. "One patrol, in terrain of my choosing. If I fail, you lose nothing. If I succeed, you gain a weapon the Germans can never counter." Aris refused. But others had heard the conversation, and word spread through the partisan network. A week later, a different commander, a younger man named Kostas who had lost his entire unit to a German ambush, came to find Stavros. "I have nothing left," Kostas said. "My men are dead. My weapons are gone. All I have is information about German patrol routes. If your dogs can do what you say, then show me." Stavros studied the young man's face, the grief, the desperation, the hunger for revenge. He saw himself in those eyes. "Show me the routes," he said. The technique Stavros developed was unlike anything the partisans had ever seen. It wasn't a conventional ambush. There were no hidden fighters, no gunfire, no evidence of human involvement. It was something more subtle and far more terrifying. The dogs would be positioned along a patrol route, hidden in caves and behind rocks, spread across a mile or more of mountain terrain. Stavros would watch the German column from a distant ridge, invisible to the naked eye. When the moment was right, he would give a series of whistle signals, different tones and patterns that the dogs had learned to interpret as complex instructions. The first signal meant, "Isolate." 1 dog would appear on the trail ahead of the column, barking and retreating, drawing the lead soldiers forward while another dog cut off the rear. The Germans would split up exactly as Stavros intended. The second signal meant panic. Dogs would appear from multiple directions, darting in and out of cover, creating the impression of a much larger pack. The Germans, already separated, would begin to lose formation, seeking cover from what appeared to be a wild animal attack. The third signal meant drive. The dogs would work together to push individual soldiers toward predetermined danger zones, cliff edges, loose scree slopes, ravines with no exit. The soldiers, disoriented and frightened, would retreat from the dogs without realizing they were being herded toward their deaths. And when a soldier was isolated and vulnerable, the fourth signal meant kill. The dogs were not attack animals in the conventional sense. They had been bred to protect sheep from wolves, not to assault armed men. But a man fleeing in panic, stumbling on rocky terrain, with 70 pounds of muscle and teeth driving him toward a cliff edge. That man didn't need to be attacked. He just needed to be pushed. The first test came in early September. A German patrol of 8 men entered a narrow pass that Stavros had selected for its combination of steep cliffs and hidden approach routes. He positioned his dogs before dawn and waited. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. When it was over, all 8 Germans were dead. 3 had fallen from cliffs. 2 had been driven into a ravine and broken their necks on the rocks below. 2 had been cornered and killed by the dogs directly. The last, Captain Mummuller, had survived long enough to crawl to a flat stone and write his final message, Hund. No shots had been fired. No partisans had been seen. The Germans had been killed by what appeared to be a pack of wild dogs, a tragic accident in dangerous terrain. Word of the success spread through the partisan network. Aris Velochiotis, the commander who had laughed at Stavros, sent a message requesting a meeting. Other partisan leaders followed. Within weeks, Stavros found himself at the center of a coordinated campaign unlike anything the Greek resistance had attempted before. The German response to the first patrol's disappearance was confusion. Wild dogs were common in the mountains, and fatal accidents were not unheard of in such difficult terrain. The Wehrmacht issued warnings about animal attacks and instructed patrols to carry extra ammunition for defense against wildlife. Then the second patrol vanished, and the third, and the fourth. By the end of September, 23 German soldiers had died in the Pindus Mountains, all in circumstances that appeared to involve wild animal attacks. The pattern was unmistakable, but the explanation was impossible. Wild dogs didn't coordinate attacks across miles of terrain. Wild dogs didn't systematically target military patrols while ignoring civilian travelers. Wild dogs didn't appear and disappear like ghosts. The Wehrmacht brought in trackers and hunting dogs. They found nothing. Stavros knew the mountains too well, knew how to move his pack without leaving trails, knew how to use streams and rocky ground to eliminate scent. The German dogs were useless in terrain that Stavros's dogs knew like their own territory. They tried sending larger patrols, 20 men, 30 men, but the larger groups were too slow, too loud, too easy to avoid. Stavros simply waited for smaller detachments or picked off stragglers. They tried abandoning the mountain routes entirely, but that ceded crucial territory to the partisans and cut off German supply lines. By October, the German command had given the phenomenon a name, der Geisterhund, the ghost dog. Intelligence reports described a supernatural creature. Some said a wolf, some said a demon, that hunted German soldiers in the mountains. Soldiers began refusing patrol assignments in the Pindus region. Morale collapsed. The Germans never understood what they were facing. They were looking for a monster, when they should have been looking for a shepherd. Over the next 80 days, Stavros and his dogs killed 420 German soldiers. The number is precise because Stavros kept count, each night. In a small notebook that he hid in a cave near his camp, he recorded the date, the location, and the number of casualties. He drew small diagrams showing how each engagement had unfolded, which dogs had performed which roles, which tactics had worked, which had required improvisation. The notebook reveals a mind of extraordinary tactical sophistication. Stavros never repeated the same approach twice. He varied his terrain, his timing, his methods. Some attacks were quick and brutal. Others were prolonged psychological campaigns that stretched over hours, driving patrols mad with fear before killing them. He learned which dog combinations worked best for different situations, which signals needed refinement, which tactics the Germans were beginning to anticipate. He also recorded his losses. Of his 7 dogs, 3 were killed during the campaign. Shot by soldiers who managed to get off aimed fire, or wounded too badly to survive. He mourned each one by name in his notebook, describing their personalities, their particular skills, the day he had trained them as puppies. Orjax died today, reads one entry. He was too brave. He went for a soldier who still had his rifle up and caught a bullet in the chest. I buried him where he fell. He was with me for 9 years. I will miss him until I die. But Stavros continued. With 4 dogs, then 3, he kept hunting. The reduced pack meant changing tactics, being more selective about targets, taking greater personal risks. But he never stopped. The Germans grew desperate. They offered bounties for information about the ghost dog, enormous sums. that could have fed a village for a year. No one talked. The mountain people knew who was killing Germans, and they would have died before betraying him. They tried a different approach, collective punishment. If a patrol was attacked in the vicinity of a village, the village would be destroyed and its inhabitants executed. It was the same brutal logic they had used throughout the occupation. Stavros responded by shifting his operations away from inhabited areas, attacking only in the deepest wilderness where no village could be blamed. When the Germans tried to follow, he led them into terrain so remote that reinforcements couldn't arrive in time to matter. By late November, German patrols had effectively ceased in the Pindus Mountains. The Wehrmacht controlled the roads and the towns, but the high country belonged to the shepherd and his dogs. The supply lines that ran through the mountain passes had to be abandoned or rerouted at enormous cost. The partisan movements that Stavros's campaign protected grew stronger, better organized, better armed. 420 Germans killed, 0 reprisal executions, because the Germans never found anyone to blame. One old shepherd with a pack of dogs had accomplished what conventional partisan operations never could. He had made an entire region too dangerous to occupy. The campaign ended in late November 1943, not because Stavros chose to stop, but because his last dog was killed. Her name was Athena, and she had been with him the longest, 12 years, since she was a puppy stumbling after her mother through the summer pastures. She was the smartest of all his dogs, the one who had understood his intentions almost before he gave the signals. He had saved her for last, protecting her from the most dangerous engagements, knowing that when she was gone, his war would be over. She died in an ambush that went wrong, a German patrol that was larger than expected, better positioned than intelligence had suggested. Stavros managed to escape, but Athena took a burst of machine gun fire, covering his retreat. He found her body the next morning, lying in a patch of autumn grass, her eyes still open. He buried her beside Ajax and the others in a hidden meadow that only he knew. Then he closed his notebook and walked out of the mountains. Stavros Papadimitriou survived the war. He was found by partisan scouts in December 1943, wandering alone through the foothills, half-starved and suffering from exposure. They brought him to a safe house, nursed him back to health, and tried to convince him to continue his campaign with new dogs. He refused. "Those dogs took 20 years to train," he said. "I'm too old to start again. And even if I could, it wouldn't be the same. They weren't weapons. They were my friends. You can't replace friends." He spent the rest of the war in hiding, occasionally advising partisan operations but never returning to combat. When Greece was liberated in 1944, he went back to his village, or what was left of it, and tried to rebuild his life. He never married again. He got new dogs, but he trained them as simple shepherd dogs, not the thinking warriors he had created before. The Greek government offered him medals, recognition, a pension for his services. He refused everything. "I don't want to be remembered for killing," he told an interviewer in 1952. "I want to be remembered as a shepherd. That's what I was. That's what I am. The war made me something else for a little while, but that's over now." His notebook was discovered after his death in 1967, hidden in the same cave where he had kept it during the war. Historians have since verified his account against German military records, which document the loss of over 400 soldiers to animal attacks and accidents in the Pindus region during the autumn of 1943. The numbers match. The German records also contain something else, a recommendation from the regional commander that all operations in the Pindus Mountains be suspended until the supernatural threat could be understood and countered. The recommendation was approved. An entire German division was effectively neutralized by 1 man and 7 dogs. There's a lesson in Stavros Papadimitriou's story. though it's not the one you might expect. It's not about tactics or training or the bond between humans and animals. It's about being underestimated. The partisan commander laughed at Stavros. The other shepherds mocked his methods. The Germans never even considered that a simple shepherd could be responsible for their losses. They invented supernatural explanations rather than accept that their mighty army was being defeated by an old man with dogs. Stavros understood something that his enemies never grasped. The most dangerous weapon is the one nobody expects. The Germans were prepared for partisans with guns. They were not prepared for a shepherd who had spent 30 years learning to communicate with dogs in ways that most people couldn't imagine. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat isn't firepower or numbers or conventional military training. Sometimes it's just one person with one unusual skill applied in ways that nobody else would think to try. One shepherd, 7 dogs, 80 days, 420 lives. That's the story they never told you about the Greek resistance. That's the missing page, Roll. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Stories like Stavros's, the forgotten heroes, the ordinary people who did extraordinary things, they deserve to be remembered. If you want to hear more of them, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. Until next time.